The Trump election playlist is officially on repeat, and the tune that keeps on playing is fraud. Democrats will cheat at the polling booth. Democrats are cheating by investigating him or convicting him for crimes he committed. And Democrats will cheat with the help of the media tomorrow night at the debate. None of this is true, but Donald Trump is still saying it over and over and over again. Joining us now, former Democratic Senator Barbara Boxer and former Republican Congressman Charlie Dent. Charlie, he says this stuff so much. Fraud, fraud, fraud. Everyone's cheating. I'm the victim. And some of it can seem like white noise. But I wonder, as you listen to this and you compare it to what we saw in 2020 in the aftermath, are you worried that this is the kind of person that, if he were to win again, would leave office? Would he be the kind of person who would leave after another 4-year term, or would he try to stay for longer, claiming that, you know, the 4 years that were denied to him in 2020 made the first term not count?
Well, of course, you have to worry about Donald Trump not leaving office. I mean, we saw what happened in 2020 when he, incited January 6th. So I would expect the same should he win again. But I think he's making a major mistake by focusing on being the victim, that he's been ripped off, that he's been cheated, unfairly prosecuted. I think that message plays to his hardcore MAGA base. Yeah, they get excited by that. But if he's trying to swing these tens of thousands of voters in swing states who are going to make a difference, I don't think that message helps him at all. So if he rants about that tomorrow, that's probably good for Team Harris. So if I were advising Trump, I'd tell him to stay the hell away from that and focus on issues like the economy, border crime, energy development. But he's not a disciplined candidate. And, the big question will be, will Donald Trump be able to control himself tomorrow night?
If he is being advised that, he's not listening. Here's his Trump Truth Social post. The 2024 election, where votes have just started being cast, will be under the closest professional scrutiny. And when I win, those people that cheated will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, which will include long-term prison sentences. This legal exposure extends to lawyers, political operatives, donors, illegal voters, and corrupt election officials. Who's he talking about, Barbara?
Well, it's all projection. That's what he does. He wants to have crooked people in these positions. Look, I so agree with what has just said. If he goes on those rants about me being the victim, that is not what the people who are undecided want to hear about. They want to know, who's going to fight for me? Who's going to care about my job, my family, my rights? Or is government going to take over my personal decisions? The biggest thing Trump is trying to get away from now is the overturning of Roe v. Wade, yet he consistently says he's responsible and he's proud of it. Well, women are bleeding out because of him, and he has done nothing in terms of the economy. That's what people want to listen to, not his rant about himself. He's a narcissist. He needs to go away. And the only way to do that is for us to win this race, for Kamala to win this race.
Can Kamala Harris beat somebody in a debate when they're not telling the truth? I mean, how does she win a debate against Donald Trump, Barbara?
Well, she's a prosecutor. Do you think she ever faced, a criminal who, do you think she faced every criminal who always told the truth? They never told the truth. So she's got to prosecute the case against him while making the case for her. I just want to put out one point. I think the economy is still the biggest issue. And what I want to see her do is tell the truth about the economy. People think Trump's better. He has the worst jobs record in history. The only president, the only one to lose more jobs than he created when he left. And he said COVID. Guess what? Biden-Harris had 2 horrible years of COVID. He had 9 months of terrible COVID. And look what they did. Record jobs, 16 million. The infrastructure bill, all the things they're doing that are playing out. People don't get that. So I'm hopeful if he starts ranting and raving about election denial and all of these things, she'll just put it aside and focus on what do the American families want. And that is a good economy, one that their personal choices perspective, and they want to feel safe.
Charlie, what do you think of that? I mean, debating Donald Trump, it's even when it's clear who wins the debate, who's homed in on the facts. who's presented the most policy, Donald Trump is seen as the winner among quite a few voters because it's about a one-liner or it's about demeanor. I mean, Hillary Clinton clearly was the victor in the debates in 2016. He still won the election.
Well, there's no question that, Kamala Harris will probably come off as more substantive. Donald Trump, he doesn't really do policy well. He just doesn't. I don't think he understands it. He's all about the show. But if I were Kamala Harris, I would be trying to prosecute the case against Trump. You have to be prepared for anything from him. You don't know what's going to come out of his mouth. But I keep pounding the fact that he is a convicted felon. I keep pounding him on the fact that he's unfit, that he tried to, deny the election results, and then go after him on substantive policy on issues like tariffs and other things on the economy, where she can say, his tariff policy is inflationary. See, she's very vulnerable on inflation as the incumbent in this case. And by the way, that's the other big issue. Who is going to be the incumbent in this race? Is it going to be Vice President Harris or is it Donald Trump? Who is the change agent? The polls are suggesting people see Trump as more of a change agent than Harris at this point. And so Harris is going to have to explain why she is the change agent and then go firing away at Trump on things like tariffs that are clearly inflationary. And she's got to make that argument persuasively to try to move people on the economy. She's not going to have any problem prosecuting Donald Trump on women's health and reproductive rights. She's in a much stronger position. In his position, well, we've all struggling with whiplash from all his various positions on that one. So I think she's got some advantages. If he's smart, he'll stick to policy and not explode temperamentally.
Barbara, what do you think of that? How do you not be the incumbent in the race?
You know what? Let's talk about change, okay? So there's good change and there's bad change. He would be a president who changed our democracy. The first one who ever said he'd be a dictator on day one wants to, with his running mate, tell women what to do with their lives. Hasn't done a thing about gun violence. Again, the worst record on the economy. And on this tariff issue, Katie, you may be right. It's, quote, popular, except when people know it's going to cost middle-class families $4,000 a year. It's a Trump tax. So bring it on. So I'm not afraid of change. We want good change. We don't want bad change. And I think she can use that in her favor.